Hello, this is the lecture for Tuesday, December 15th, 2020 for European history. Um, we have talked about Napoleon Bonaparte's rise from an obscure Corsican background to the victor at Toulon, his dispersal of the Paris mob with a whiff of grape shot, his campaigns in Switzerland and Italy, his conquest of Egypt and retrieval of the Rosetta Stone, his return to France, establishment of a new French Republic as first consul, his conquests in Central and Eastern Europe, his conquests of Spain, his crowning himself emperor, and the high point of his power when Antilst, the emperor of the French, and the Tsar of all the Russias met on a barge in the middle of the Nieman River and split the world. Europe to Napoleon, Russia to Russia, they would respect one another. But there's a reason why the game Risk is usually using Napoleonic warfare iconography, the soldiers, the cannons, the cavalry, and so forth. Because in Risk, you don't split the world. You split the world until all of your combined common enemies are destroyed, and then you conquer your allies, either by backstabbing them or by mutual agreement. So, in 1812, after a series of provocations, Napoleon is going to invade Russia. Now, what I told people yesterday was, if you look in your notes, you can see a graph, which you have right there, Mr. Heath. You all do. And that graph shows the state of Napoleon's army as it goes into Russia. Marshal Mikhail Kutuzov, the Russian commander, does not want to fight Napoleon any more than Fabius Cunctator wanted to fight Hannibal in the Second Punic War. Instead, he withdraws ahead of Napoleon, and within 100 miles north or south of Napoleon's very predictable route of march, he establishes a scorched earth policy. This scorched earth policy is designed to prevent the French from living off the land, which is what those armies of that time really needed to do. They carried very limited supplies with them. Usually they had to supplement those with food from the countryside, but there was no food. The Russians had destroyed or removed it all and burned down their own homes. The deeper they got into Russia, the more desperate the French became for sustenance. Finally, the Russian Tsar insists that the Russian army fights once for the sake of honor. So at Borodino, Mikhail Kutuzov stands, fights the French army until just the point where the Tsar Alexander agrees honor has been served, and he immediately withdraws and continues his scorched earth policy. Napoleon marches on Moscow, occupies it, but it's an empty city. The Tsar is east of Moscow with the people of Moscow, and if necessary, he can retreat all the way to the Pacific Ocean. Napoleon can't advance that far. Napoleon is waiting for a peace offer from the Russian Tsar that will never come. Napoleon thinks, I've won the war. I invaded, I beat the army, I occupy their capital city. This is how we win wars in Europe, but he's not in Europe. Russia is only partially in Europe. And as the snows begin to fall in October, because it's Russia near Moscow with a climate like central Manitoba, things are not looking good. And then the smell of smoke and the sight of fire as Russian agents burn the city. They fire the city of Moscow, forcing Napoleon out. Now, we will flash back a little bit to Napoleon's high point at Tilst to the good old days of just a few years ago. How does Napoleon govern Europe? Well, the short answer is he governs Europe like a mafioso, like a mafia crime lord, where blood calls out for blood. That is what nepotism means. Nepotism, the definition of the word, is when you hire or promote or prefer. When you hire or promote or prefer blood relatives over anyone else. It's when you prefer relatives over competence. It's when you prefer blood relatives over competence. You might have somebody who works for you, but they're not loyal to you. They're not tied to you beyond a certain point. They simply work for you. Let's give an example. When Napoleon conquers Spain, he could put anyone he wants on the Spanish throne. He could have even put the old king, the old royal family, on the Spanish throne so long as they submitted to him. That's not what he does. No. Napoleon puts his brother Joe in charge of Spain. Joe Bonaparte is now king of Spain, Joseph Bonaparte. And Joseph Bonaparte is not a brilliant fellow. Joe Bonaparte didn't make history, except that his brother made him king of Spain. Joe Bonaparte is not a man of exceptional gifts, like Napoleon. Joe Bonaparte is a mediocrity, a mediocre man, a very mediocre poor king. But why does Napoleon put Joe in charge of Spain? Because Joe's his brother. Because Joe understands that without Napoleon, Joe Bonaparte would be nothing special. Joe's entire path to continued success is with the success of Napoleon. Without Napoleon, there's no Joe Bonaparte in any prominent role. So, when it comes to deciding as the King of Spain what to do, Joe Bonaparte knows more than anything else, whatever he does has to help his brother Napoleon. If it doesn't help his brother Napoleon, he's not doing it. Because his whole job, the reason he was hired to be King of Spain, is so that good old Joe Bonaparte could rule in a absolutely loyal fashion to Napoleon. Napoleon puts other relatives on the thrones of other European countries, small and medium-sized. But the biggest goes to Joseph Bonaparte, King of Spain. Nepotism is the name of the game when it comes to Napoleon appointing important people around Europe, because nepotism allows Napoleon to trust. Napoleon will not trust anyone that isn't a blood relative. And Napoleon knows that by appointing blood relatives, he's appointing people who really couldn't have done the job, couldn't have gotten the job without him. And that's okay. Rather than having a super competent but potentially disloyal stranger take a job like that, he wants people that he knows he can trust. People whose entire existence depends on him. So, nepotism is the name of the game. Napoleon is also, even though he's a general, oddly enough, one of the most important men in the history of law. Why? Well, let's look at what we know about the history of law so far. You've got Hammurabi's Code, an eye for an eye, a tooth for a tooth, a life for a life among equals. You've got the 12 Tables, which are public and equal. It's what you do, not who you are. We've got Justinian's Code, which is a Byzantine era recodification of Roman law since the 12 tables, based on the 12 tables. Justinian's code is a basis for many European law codes in the Middle Ages. And those that aren't are still based in some respect on Roman law before that. Napoleon is going to organize this Roman tradition of law into what is known as the Napoleonic Code. Now, the Napoleonic Code is the most common law code used in the world. We don't use it because our system of law is based in English common law. But the Napoleonic Code is used by most European countries in one form or another, and it's also used by many countries around the world as a basis for Western law. So, what is different about Napoleonic Code justice from our English common law? Okay, first of all, the Napoleonic Code is a preordained set of standards of evidence for a set of predetermined crimes connected to a set of pre-planned punishments. The judge is not as free in the Napoleonic Code courts to decide guilt or innocence because of the structure that Napoleonic Code justice has. The structure is far more important than the judge's judgment. Also, the sentencing guidelines in Napoleonic Code justice are tighter than those in English common law traditional. But there's more. A defense attorney. Okay, where does English common law come from then? It is rooted in what is called precedent. P-R-E-C-E-D-E-N-T. Precedent. P-R-E-C-E-D-E-N-T. Precedent. P-R-E-C-E-D-E-N-T. Precedent. Comes from the word precedes. Here's how precedent works. If we're in an English common law courtroom and somebody gets accused of murder and the defense says he was sleepwalking, he killed this person in his family when he was sleepwalking, we have evidence to prove at the time that he was sleepwalking. He has a history of sleepwalking. He takes medication for sleepwalking. He failed to take his medication for a few days before this incident, and witnesses say that he seemed to be sleepwalking even as he grabbed the club and started clubbing. If I make a decision based on the merits of this case as to whether what happened was first-degree murder, pre-planned, second-degree murder, crime of opportunity, manslaughter, which is the killing of someone by negligence, but by not necessarily in any way on purpose. Manslaughter is a different crime from murder. Or maybe it was something that doesn't require a criminal charge because he was sleepwalking. And is he responsible for what his subconscious does? So I'm going to weigh all of these things. And I'm going to make a determination in this fictional case that it was manslaughter. That his negligence in terms of taking his medication made him much more dangerous when it comes to his sleep issues, and therefore that he did not do his part to protect himself and others from his wild sleepwalking adventures, and in this case, he managed to kill a family member. It's not murder. There's no evidence that it was premeditated. It's manslaughter. Now, if I make that judgment, and that judgment survives appeal, That's going to be a precedent. Other courts will take that into account if they encounter similar cases. Now, if I'm a federal judge or a Supreme Court justice, and a case like this comes up, and I and my court, just federal district court or the U.S. Supreme Court gets it, they definitely are setting precedent. They're deciding how the law will be interpreted in cases like these, right? So precedents are previous cases that affect future decisions. They are previous cases whose outcomes affect future decisions. Previous cases whose outcomes affect future decisions. That is precedence. And English common law is incredibly shaped by precedents. Why do we have English common law? Because we started out as the 13 colonies of British North America, and our justice system evolved from that. So English common law has a flexibility over time that Napoleonic code doesn't, because the Napoleonic code has the centrally derived law code to take into account, whereas English common law is much more rooted in precedents. That's a difference. Here's another difference. What is the job of the defense attorney? In an American or English common law courtroom, if I am accused of a crime that I am guilty of, my lawyer is responsible for pleading not guilty and for fighting the case. What if the lawyer discovers that I'm guilty? Well, if he's a good defense attorney, it won't matter to him because a good defense attorney, and I could never be one, doesn't care that much. See, our system, the English common law system, the American system, is trial by combat between lawyers. It's called the adversarial system. And the idea is the prosecutor battles for conviction. The defense attorney battles for the minimum possible sentence or not guilty. They fight and fight and fight and fight and fight. And when they fight, the truth will come out. Instead of knights duking it out in trial by combat, we have lawyers duking it out. If an American defense attorney went into open court and said, you know what, my client is guilty as sin, in fact, he'll do it again. He's a mass murderer, and you've only caught him once. I know of at least 3 other cases where he's killed and got away with it. A, there'd be a mistrial. B, he'd have to be put on trial again. C, I would be disbarred and thrown in jail for engaging in a criminal act. I'd be disbarred for breaking the lawyer's code, and I would be thrown in jail because my role as a defense attorney is not to bring out the truth. My goal as a defense attorney is to protect my client from harm. The system is supposed to convict him if he's guilty, against my lawyer's best efforts, against my defense attorney's best efforts. If my defense attorney cannot handle defending a guilty man, first of all, why on earth isn't he a prosecutor or a property law specialist? Why is he a defense attorney? All defense attorneys have to defend guilty people at some point or other. If you aren't comfortable with that, you should never go into that line of work. Secondly, what he can do is resign. But he can't resign publicly and with great fuss in a way that obviously prejudices judgments against his client. He's got to do it as quietly and unobtrusively as possible. And if he's in a law firm, he'll switch lawyers. Some other lawyer will take the lead. That law firm, on the other hand, is now going to reevaluate whether they're going to even keep this guy. To be a defense attorney requires a very strong stomach and a very strong will to not worry about it, to let the system do what the system does. So in America, my attorney is going to fight for a not guilty plea. And if he can get it, he'll get it, whether or not I'm guilty. The prosecutor has to prove I'm guilty. The jury or the judge has to be shown beyond a reasonable doubt evidence that I am guilty. If they are shown that evidence beyond a reasonable doubt, I will be found guilty. But there is a presumption in English common law of innocence until proven guilty. Until I'm proven guilty, you will presume that I am innocent. It has to do with the way things work. To my chagrin, yesterday the Electoral College elected or voted for Vice President Biden to become President-elect Biden. I'm not happy about this. I still think if there was election fraud, there's time for it to come out. But from this point, the presumption is that he is the president-elect. So I will call him, I don't want to, President-elect Biden. Why? Because that's the way the system works. The burden is now even more on President Trump and his people to demonstrate massive election fraud in a way that courts will accept the case and do judgment. In the United States, you are innocent until proven guilty. And if the prosecutor cannot prove your guilt beyond a reasonable doubt, you're walking. Or you're going to get a lesser sentence through plea bargaining. Not so in the Napoleonic Code. In Napoleonic Code court, my defense attorney's job is to plead if I am guilty and it's obvious that I'm guilty, guilty with extenuating circumstances. He doesn't try to argue that I'm innocent of a crime I'm obviously guilty of, that he knows I'm guilty of. He is arguing guilty. Yeah, he's not disputing that. But there are extenuating circumstances that led to this murderous act or this criminal act. What are the extenuating circumstances? Well, maybe I'm insane. Maybe I was reacting to a situation that was overwhelmingly hard to cope with. The French have an entire court devoted to what are called crimes of passion. So let's deal with one of them. I come home from one day early from the office. Got a promotion, want to take the wife out. And I go to the house, and the pool van is there, cleaner. And I go into the house, and I hear noises coming from the bedroom that shouldn't happen unless I'm in the bedroom with my wife. I walk in, and I find her in flagrante delicto with the pool boy. Now, I see red, and the next thing I know, I'm holding a smoking shotgun, and there are two dead people in front of me, my wife and the pool boy. What happened? Well, did I shoot dead my philandering, cheating wife and her lover? Yeah, they're dead. I killed them, no question. But are there extenuating circumstances? Yes. Some people, when faced with a situation like that, will walk away. Some people, when faced with a situation like that, will revert to caveman self. And caveman self say, you take my woman let you take her, you're both dead. And that's what happened. Was it premeditated? Absolutely not. Was it a reaction? An emotional reaction to the situation? Yeah, obviously it was. So, if I'm guilty with extenuating circumstances, how do you treat it? Well, probably the European court will treat it much less like murder and much more like manslaughter, because my conscious mind didn't have much to do with what was going on. I saw red. That is an expression from Vietnam War times. What that means is I'm in a moment of violence. I'm not thinking, I'm just doing. And a well-trained soldier can function in a battle without thinking. In fact, that's part of the point of basic training, to get you to function and operate almost machine-like when your mind is going, because battle. So do you see the difference? Oh, there's one other thing. So the defense attorney's jobs are different. The other thing that's different is in Napoleonic Code justice, you are presumed guilty, and you have to demonstrate your innocence. That's kind of a big deal. That's a huge deal, in fact. The presumption of guilt is something that you have to deal with. The presumption is that you wouldn't have been arrested Your case would not have been brought to trial by the prosecution if there wasn't compelling evidence that you'd done it. So you've got to demonstrate beyond a reasonable doubt that you didn't do it. The burden of proof is not on the prosecutor. The burden of proof is as much on the defense attorney. Do you see the problem there or the difference there? Our system is willing to let 10 guilty people go rather than convict one innocent man. The Napoleonic Code is much more like Hammurabi's Code in that it's not just about justice in the case, it's about protecting society. And in the name of protecting society, if 10 guilty men go to jail, or I'm sorry, if 10 innocent men go to jail, at least that one guilty person won't walk. Yes?
So the Napoleonic Code is more focused on justification rather than proving to do it?
Right. If it's obvious that you did it. Now, if it's not obvious that you did it, your defense attorney will still try to plead not guilty unless he knows you are. In America, if you prejudice a case against your client because you found out that you're guilty, at the very least, you're going to face disbarment. In Europe, if you knowingly defend guilty people, there are problems that can happen, depending on the country. But the very fact that the presumption of guilt is there means that you're in a very different situation in a Napoleonic Code courtroom. In America, you are presumed innocent until proven beyond a reasonable doubt guilty. It's the other way around in Europe. It is a much harder hill to climb to prove your innocence than it is to have the prosecutor prove your guilt. Do you see? So, but it works, and it preserves law and order. So that's the Napoleonic Code in a nutshell. Napoleon also believes that the Royal Navy, rightly, is funded by British tax money. And British tax money in this nation of shopkeepers that he contemptuously calls Britain is dependent upon trade. The taxes come from trade. Well, the British sell a lot of goods to Europe, and Napoleon rules Europe. And Britain's at war with Napoleon more often than not during this time. So Napoleon establishes what is called the Continental System. The Continental System is a trade embargo against Britain. Nobody under Napoleon's rule is allowed legally to trade with the British, period. The Continental System says that we will not trade with the British. It's a trade embargo against Britain. It is a law that makes it illegal for anyone under Napoleon's dominion to trade with Britain. You know what happens in a case like this? What always happens when the government makes a law about trade that's unpopular? A black market develops. The American government in the 1920s makes laws against drinking alcohol because booze is bad. What happens? Gangsters rise because people go to them to get the booze that they can't get legally. If at some point, against the Second Amendment to the U.S. Constitution, the federal government actually establishes gun control across the United States, what do you think will happen? We'll do the same thing. Criminals have never had trouble finding guns. In my old neighborhood in the Bronx, if gun control laws worked, it would be the safest part of the country. It's one of the most dangerous parts of the country because nobody but criminals has guns. What will happen is that normally law-abiding Americans who want to have the ability to defend themselves, their families, their homes, and so forth, will find a way to get guns whether the U.S. government lets them or not. It's what always happens. If the government puts price controls on meat, butchers will develop new cuts of meat that the government doesn't have laws for. A black market, an illegal smuggler's market, always develops when the government tries to control trade beyond a certain point. Now, a lot of people suffer, and criminals get wealthy and powerful. But the government can say, well, we make sure that nothing bad happens, and if it happens, it's against our rules. So they can feel sanctimonious, while at the same time their policy are enriching and strengthening organized crime. What Napoleon's continental system does is exactly that. A bunch of people that were legal traders before become traitors because they continue to secretly trade with the British. Why? Because it's much less expensive than trading with the official French government. Also, because Britannia rules the waves, the British have products that you can't grow in Europe that you can't find anywhere else. Like the Germans in the world wars, the French are cut off from a lot of global trade. Because of this, you can't get certain supplies that you've gotten used to getting: chocolate, sugar, tobacco, things like that. So people secretly trade with the British. This drives Napoleon mad. So he tries establishing more regulations and more inspectors, and it just makes things harsher. It makes Napoleon much more unpopular. By the way, it was the Russians' refusal to take part in the Continental System that's one of Napoleon's excuses for going to war. Now, Russia was not under Napoleon's dominion, they had an agreement, but still, Napoleon kind of took it personally when the Russians will trade with the British, and it's okay for Europeans to trade with the Russians. See how that's going to work? I want sugar from Jamaica. The only way I can get it is buying sugar from the Russians. Because you grow a lot of sugar in Russia. Yeah, sugar requires heat, continental, tropical climate, things like that. Aren't many Russian tropical sugar fields. So Napoleon's continental system is a source of things. Now, there's something else I didn't write on here, but I should. I should have had it on here. I got to change my notes. It is the Louisiana Purchase. Britannia rules the waves. At this point, during Napoleon's time, the French controlled the greater Mississippi Valley all the way to the Continental Divide, which is the line west of which everything flows into the Pacific, east of which everything flows into the Atlantic. The southeastern Idaho border with Montana, south of Salmon and Challis, is along the Continental Divide. We are in the westward flowing area. So the Mississippi Valley to the Continental Divide is controlled by France. But there are only a few thousand Frenchmen in all of the Louisiana Territory. The Americans are to the east. They want that land. The British are at sea. They're going to take it because the French can't stop them because Britannia rules the waves. So Napoleon does a deal with President Jefferson. In the early 1800s, President Jefferson buys the Louisiana Territory from France at pennies on the acre. What that means is suddenly the United States of America doubles in size. We get much closer to the Pacific. Lewis and Clark are going to have to explore all these new lands. And the British are not going to get Louisiana. Meanwhile, France at least gets some money for territory that they couldn't hold on to anyway. If the British sent a battle squadron into New Orleans Harbor, New Orleans would have become British. So by selling the land to the Americans, America benefits and France benefits. So there's some cleverness there. And the advantage is that Jefferson has always been sort of pro-French and anti-British, so that makes it work. Now we come to the running sword. The running sword, the wound that will not heal, is the Peninsular Campaign. Joe Bonaparte's a lousy king of Spain. He's a good brother to Napoleon, but he's a lousy king of Spain. And the Spanish have been sort of being eclipsed for the last few hundred years. Cortez is gone. Okay, Pizarro even is gone. Spain has been sort of a backwards, quiet retirement home country for a couple hundred years. It has not been on top of the world since the defeat of the Spanish Armada. If Spaniards want to fight, there's one place in the empire they can go, and that's Chile. Because in Chile, there's a tough group of Indians called the Araucanians, and the Araucanians fight the Spaniards for over 200 years. They keep the Spaniards out. That's an amazing record. It's one of the best records of any native peoples fighting Europeans. 2 centuries. So any Spaniard worth his salt would go out to Chile to fight and would stay there. But as weak and as sort of doddery as the Spaniards have become, as seen from outside, the Spaniards have a temper. And they can fight viciously. The French and their puppet king, Joe Bonaparte, occupies Spain. And they start telling the Spaniards what to do. And they start treating the Spaniards with great personal disrespect. If you ever want to fight an Italian, do this, because that's an insulting, obscene gesture in Italy. Or you can say certain words to them, like almost anyone. And, I once asked my father in law, who grew up speaking Italian and English, what does this word mean? And he looked at me and he looked at his daughter and he said, it means I want to fight you right here, right now. That's what it means. He wouldn't say what it meant beyond that because it was too obscene, and his daughter was sitting right there. Um, in Spain, if you want to fight a Spaniard right here, right now, treat them with casual disrespect. Spaniards traditionally will get their backs up over stuff like that. They don't like being treated with personal disrespect. You can do all sorts of things with them if you treat them with personal respect. The French don't. So the Spaniards launch the massive guerrilla war that is the Peninsular Campaign. Like Vietnam or Afghanistan, the Spaniards don't start wearing uniforms and fighting in straight lines. The Spaniards attack from ambush wearing civilian clothes. They hit, they run. They assassinate people. They steal payrolls. They burn Spanish fortifications. They kill collaborators who work with the Spanish, who work with the French, but who are Spanish. They fight in any way and in every way they can. They start bleeding the French army. The English help them. With the English ally Portugal, the Arthur Wellesley, the future Duke of Wellington, lands in Iberia and he starts fighting the Spaniards. So the Spaniards are engaged in guerrilla warfare. Arthur Wellesley's small but very well trained British army is also supporting this with some regular war tactics. And the Spaniards actually develop a few regular units to fight alongside the future Duke of Wellington. Napoleon sends men and generals into Spain, and it is a quagmire. It is like quicksand. The more the French send in, the more the Spanish kill, the more soldiers you need. It is an unanswerable problem. So Napoleon never goes to Spain himself. That's for other people. In part because Napoleon, on a gut level, understands that this is not a war like the others. This is not a war where you march on the enemy capital and take it and everything's fine. This is a war of the Spanish people against the French army. And the Spanish people outnumber the French army. They know the land. It's going to be a very nasty thing. So the French never really control Spain, not after Joe Bonaparte alienates the Spanish people. And now it's 1812, and Napoleon marches into Russia. And the Russians have just burned Moscow, and the snow is falling. Napoleon's retreat from Moscow, which you can see traced on the bottom part of that table, is an epic story of death. General Winter comes a calling, and General Winter is 40 and 50 degrees below zero Fahrenheit degrees weather. The French are used to Virginia, like summers and winters, where there's occasional ice storms and maybe snow once every so often. They're not used to 40 degrees below zero temperatures. French soldiers fall asleep, freeze solid, and die. French soldiers have limbs amputated because of the frostbite. The French start their long, 1,000-plus mile retreat back to Europe. And at this point, the Russian army starts hitting them. Not in a big battle. The Cossacks, the Russian cavalry, come in and do saber attacks and hit and run. The Russians blow up bridges, so the French have to go through the streams. The Russians don't let the French go around and search for food. It soon becomes this death march where French soldiers are marching out of Europe, out of Russia, as quickly as they can, with the Russian army on their heels. Napoleon's will actually breaks, and two-thirds of the way to the German border, Napoleon breaks and runs with his horsemen, leaving his foot soldiers to slog it out. That actually is a breach of faith that is amazingly severe, given how much Napoleon's men are loyal to him. Napoleon leaves his foot soldiers behind. Of the army of almost 500,000 men, of the 400,000 men that enter Russia, fewer than 10,000 return. 10,000 out of 400,000. That means 1 out of 40 survive.
Doesn't Russia do that like at least one more time in World War II?
Yes, it does. There are similar things between Napoleon and Hitler. We're going to get to that. And actually, Joe Stalin. There are three similarities. And we will talk about that. I don't have time to do it much today. But yeah, into the motherland, the German army marched, as Sabaton sings, and it's not a good day for the Germans. It takes a while. The Germans almost win, but they don't. And then they experience Russian winter after Russian winter after Russian winter, and the Russian steamroller just runs them over. Okay, Napoleon is back in Europe. His army is damaged. At this point, the Germans and the Austrians rise up as the Russian army enters in pursuit. In 1814, the Allies, including the British under Wellesley, march on Paris and Napoleon surrenders. Napoleon is exiled to the island of Elba. Elba is west of Italy. It's near Corsica. He has a little kingdom. He has a little fleet. It's a tiny island. It basically allows Napoleon to keep some dignity, but he's not anything like a powerful man anymore. And they leave him there. And the victorious powers begin to redraw Europe's borders at the Congress of Vienna. But in early 1815, Napoleon's going to defy them all. Even though Elba is surrounded by British warships, Napoleon sneaks out. He lands in southern France with a small group of men. Now, a king, the sort of uncle of the last kings of France, fat old guy, is put back on the throne of France. A Bourbon once again rules in France. And the king learns Napoleon is in France again. He's in southern France. So the king sends an army down, and that army disappears. You lose contact. So the king goes to his military advisor, Marshal Ney. Marshal Ney was made a marshal by Napoleon. Marshal Ney is one of Napoleon's key people. Ney promises the king he'll arrest Napoleon, bring him to justice. Ney marches south. When the two men meet, Ney's men become Napoleon's men. Ney no longer is the king's man. Ney is Napoleon's man. Every group that's sent south to deal with Napoleon joins him. Napoleon marches on Paris, the king retreats, and all of a sudden Europe is faced with another case of Napoleonitis. What to do? Our armies have just gotten home. The Russians have just gotten home. We're going to have to fight again. This whole period is called the 100 Days. So Napoleon understands that he is the ruler of France and that the Europeans won't accept it without some defeats. He knows that the British and the Prussians are going to meet in Belgium, in Holland, in the Low Countries between France and Germany. So he decides, rather than waiting for his enemies to slowly organize and get together, he's going to strike northward. And he's going to destroy the British before the Prussians can arrive. The two forces meet near a town called Waterloo. The British and the French, the British under Arthur Wellesley, who will be the Duke of Wellington, the French under Napoleon, and approaching from the east is Marshal Blucher and the Prussian army. In this turning point battle of world history, at the Battle of Waterloo, you see Napoleon trying to play head games with Wellington. But Napoleon has been doing this. It's 1815 now. He started doing this in 1794. He's been doing this for over 20 years. He's tired. He's sick. He's old. He's been through this all before. Wellington won't be provoked. Napoleon says about Wellington This man thinks he can win war by sitting on his ass because Wellington will not be moved to counterattack. Wellington holds his ground and he keeps his reserves hidden from Napoleon behind a series of hills. So Napoleon doesn't actually know what he's fighting. He lashes out, he probes, he attacks, he tries to provoke the British. He almost breaks through the British line on several occasions. Meanwhile, the Prussian army gets closer and closer. Napoleon has cavalry scouts out to delay the Prussians. They don't meet the Prussians. They're off doing attacks somewhere. The Prussians continue to get closer. Finally, as the day wears on, Napoleon attacks. No, Napoleon doesn't attack. Napoleon is sick in bed. Marshal Ney attacks with his cavalry without infantry support. The cavalry attack. The British form fighting squares of men. The cavalry are killed as they go between the fighting squares. The French cavalry is destroyed. Then Napoleon realizes what's been going on and he sends in the heart of his army, the old guard, these tough old warhorse infantrymen. They are broken against the British lines as Blucher arrives. When Blucher arrives, it's over. The Battle of Waterloo is a British and Prussian victory, mainly a British victory, and the French are crushed. Napoleon is again arrested, and he is sent to the island of St. Helena in the tropical Atlantic Ocean in the middle of nowhere, where he lives out the last few years of his life in sweating, hot, humid misery. Meanwhile, the victorious powers gather in the Congress of Vienna to plan how they're going to turn back the clock to before the French Revolution. That's the deal with Napoleon. And that's the end of our unit. Now, quickly in regards to art and culture. Post-Renaissance art becomes more and more and more ornate in some respects. The Baroque era in fine arts and Rococo deal with more and more ornate. However, Rembrandt van Rijn is also a Baroque era painter. He's from the Netherlands and he paints everyday life. One of the great famous paintings of Rembrandt is the Night Watch. A group of night watch fire watchers, sort of like a volunteer fire department, sort of like a social club that also fights fires and crime, hires Rembrandt to paint them all. And what they expect is sort of a group photo where everyone's face is shown. No, no, no. Rembrandt paints an action scene where they're gathering people in the streets to sort of celebrate, and some of them are fully painted, and other guys, you can see the tip of their helmet. They were not happy, the ones that didn't get shown in the painting. But Rembrandt made it come alive. It's a beautiful painting, The Night Watch. Neoclassical art is epitomized by Jacques-Louis David, who is the painter of the Marat painting and Napoleon crowning himself, and a bunch of others. He tries to revive the spirits of Greece and Rome in his paintings. His paintings are realistic but heroic. By the way, another Baroque era painter is El Greco, a Spanish painter who's called the Greek. And El Greco's paintings tend to be very vertically stretched. There are a lot of paintings of Jesus, and it looks like Jesus is literally floating off the surface of the earth because he's the Son of God. So everything is hyper attenuated. It's thin, it's tall, a bit like a carnival mirror. And that painting over there is a painting of a storm clouds over a Spanish city, which is El Greco classically, the one just to the right of the corner. Okay, Western music. We don't really know what the Greeks and Romans listened to for music. We don't have it. What we do have is medieval Gregorian chants. But in the late Middle Ages and the Renaissance, this began to change. Westerners developed the musical scale, they developed the musical language of notes, and do, re, mi, fa, sol, la, ti, do, all that stuff. This brings out Renaissance and Baroque music. Baroque music is the full flower of this new form of complex written music, unique in the world. We develop machines for music, like the harpsichord, instruments that no one else has. Everyone in the world has drums and chants. Lots of people have horns and flutes. No one else has the harpsichord. No one else has written music, symphonic music. During the Baroque period of music, Johann Sebastian Bach epitomizes the elegant clockwork intricacy of music. Handel writes one of the only great English operas, The Messiah. Baroque music is like listening to uh, a music box. It's very, very, very elegant. It's very, very, very mathematically precise. But during the time of the late Louis XVI and the French Revolution and Napoleon, in Vienna especially, this mathematical clockwork precision is going to be joined with passion. You have a mixture of the passion of music designed to evoke deep feelings and the elegant clockwork beauty of the Baroque period. This is the time of Haydn and Mozart and Beethoven, especially. Beethoven writes his third symphony, the Eroica, for the heroic Napoleon. But he later grows despairing of Napoleon, and he no longer sees him as a liberator, he sees him as a dictator. So he changes his feelings about it. The ultimate expression of Viennese classical is the last movement of Beethoven's Ninth Symphony, the Ode to Joy. That chorally is one of the high points of Western music. Now, what we are moving into is the clockwork precision, the mathematical elegance of the Baroque. The Viennese classical couples that in good balance with passion. But where we're heading is in the 19th century, the Romantic era of music, of Berlioz, of Wagner, of Mahler, where passion and the stories of music overshadow any mathematical precision. So that's where music is going. And there we are. The exam will be tomorrow for you guys, Thursday for everyone else, or tomorrow for the A-Day people, Thursday for you guys and everyone else. And it'll be a big one. I'm also going to find a way for you guys to correct it in real time so that hopefully before the end of the week, you will not only know what you got, but you'll know what you got when you do your corrections. Have a happy and wondrous day. See you Thursday. Bye bye.